The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Carrier Wi-Fi State of the Market with the Wireless Broadband Alliance. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar featuring two great speakers, Tom Brand, Senior Director, Marketing and Industry Development for the Wireless Broadband Alliance, and Caroline Gabriel, Research Director for Maravedis-Rethink. My name is Adlan Fella, and I'll be presenting some housekeeping items before we start the presentation. The agendas for today is we'll be presenting some of the features of GoToWebinar that you may not be familiar with. That will be followed by the perspective from the WBA by Tom Brand, representing some of the visions of the Alliance. That will be followed by a detailed review of the findings of the latest research we have conducted in partnership with the WBA and presenting the key findings and predictions for the carrier Wi-Fi state of the market by Caroline Gabriel. This event will last for an hour and the presentation will last for 45 minutes, followed by questions and answers at the end of the presentations. Some housekeeping items here for those that are not familiar with the webinar interface. You have a dashboard that you can open and close depending on what part of the screen you want to see. You can click square to toggle the viewer window between full screen and window mode. You have a choice of audio, either selecting the microphone speakers or using the telephone list provided. You can submit questions anytime during the event. Only type your questions and will be reviewed by the audience. Sorry. Commonly asked questions include: can I obtain the slides? Yes, this presentation slide deck will be provided to you within 24 hours and the event is also recorded. So we'll be able to send you the the recorded link within the next 2 business days. Before I move on to Tom's presentation, just a quick word on Maravedis-Rethink for those that are not familiar with our organization. We are a wireless infrastructure analyst firm and have been around since 2002. We have a number of research offerings that are all around the wireless infrastructure. MOSA stands for the Mobile Operator Strategy Analysis Service. It's a service that tracks top 100 mobile operators in detail, looking at the wireless infrastructure strategies as well as some of the challenges and solutions and innovations that are driving the business and deployment of mobile networks. RAN, which stands for Radio Access Network, is a service that tracks developments and innovations in the wireless infrastructure access network in hot topics such as Cloud RAN, NFV, etc. We also have a dedicated service for backhaul, where we look at, in particular, wireless backhaul innovation and deployments in light of information provided by the carriers as well as the vendors. Clear Spectrum stands for a database where we track spectrum information for the top 100 countries as far as access bands as well as some of the backhaul frequency bands concerned. We have Wireless Watch and Fortown, which are weekly issues looking at important developments in the industry. In particular, Wireless Watch looks at important developments in the wireless industry, while Fortline looks at digital and content. All of those services translate into a number of research offerings and outputs. So we do produce reports, research notes, databases in particular for MOSA with the operator deployments and strategies. Database also includes the information we have in Clear Spectrum for Spectrum. We also conduct on a regular basis online surveys such as the one we will be providing the results for today. And of course, all of this is supported by analyst support. Before I move on to Tom, I would like to launch the first poll to understand where the audience is coming from. So please take a few seconds here to answer the question on the poll. Which part of the ecosystem do you belong to? And that helps us understand you better, the audience. So we still have responses coming in. I'd like to leave a few more seconds here. Get more responses. And we'll have more people voting. I'll be closing the poll now and sharing the results. So we have a pretty much even distribution of categories here. 17% belong to carriers. We have equivalent between software and hardware vendors, about 25% each. 29% high representation of the press, analyst, and consultant community, and 6% coming from other categories of ecosystem. So now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Ton. Ton, I will please just share your screen. There you go.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Like Adlan said, my name is Tom Brand, and I'm Senior Director for Marketing and Industry Development. And what I'd like to do very briefly is give you kind of an overview, unless you're not quite aware of what the WBA does. Also, kind of to set the scene about a number of the questions that we put together for the industry report, and why we're looking into those specific subjects. So. Just moving on, the WBA was actually founded about 10 years ago by a group of 5 operators that wanted to embark on a development of Wi-Fi roaming. And although Wi-Fi roaming is still a considerable part of the activities within the WBA, we've moved considerably beyond that to look at what we call the Next Generation Wi-Fi platform. And basically what we want to do is to create a Wi-Fi ecosystem between operators and with vendor support that drives a much more interoperable, seamless, and secure customer experience. We believe that the customer experience and the secure seamless aspect can be improved considerably. And with the number of technology developments that are happening, we can move this forward and create a much better platform for customers to experience Wi-Fi. To do so, we develop kind of our roadmap into 4 major building blocks. Sorry. First of all is what we call making NGH commercial reality. I'll dive a little bit into NGH in a moment, but what we call with NGH, or the Next Generation Hotspot, is to deliver almost a cellular experience to the user whilst they are connecting onto a Wi-Fi network. So the seamless access and the secure authentication that you have when you use your mobile phone, that exact experience we want to deliver into a Wi-Fi network. To do that, obviously, the interoperability aspects and roaming is going to be an important part, because that will also deliver to the customer that experience that he is going to go from one network to another network without having to switch apps or put in new codes or credit card numbers, even worse than that, and make that experience more suitable for the end user. To do so, obviously, we need to engage with a lot of parts of different industries, and that is obviously not only the mobile operator, that is also the fixed line operators, the cable operators, and the vendor community. In that development, what we see is that we look at is what we call the carrier Wi-Fi. A lot of what now is currently seen as public Wi-Fi is sometimes operated and managed in a very professional way, In other parts of the industry, you'll see that public Wi-Fi is managed on a best effort basis, and not necessarily always to the benefit of the user trying to access the network. So to do that, carrier Wi-Fi is for us a very important component of that. And the interoperability compliance program that was part of the industry report is driving that forward to create a much more robust interoperability and carrier-like aspect towards setting up roaming relationships and setting up interoperability between networks. Like I said, so the industry engagement for us is very, very important because there's no way, of course, that we can do this on our own. So we work together with a lot of different organizations. So on the left-hand side, you see the GSMA as one of the most important parts towards the mobile operator community, where we work on Wi-Fi to Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi to GSM roaming agreements and standards. We collectively look at the standards that are coming out of 3GPP and how Wi-Fi is represented in those standards. We work with cable labs to look at the specific roaming frameworks that are in place with the cable operators and how we can extend that to the Wi-Fi operator community. Obviously, the right-hand side, Wi-Fi Alliance, is a big and very important partner. The underlying technology that we apply within our NGH program is all based on the Passpoint and Hotspot 2.0 specifications that are delivered by the Wi-Fi Alliance. They are the baseline of giving us the technology and the opportunity to create that secure and seamless access into operator networks. So from that point of view, Wi-Fi Alliance is a very, very important partner. Equally, the small cell is becoming much more relevant than it has been over the last years. Any analyst report at the moment will show you that Wi-Fi and small cells almost go hand in hand, and the integration of GSM and Wi-Fi small cell equipment and the interoperability is where what we discuss within the small cells forum. On the bottom hand, you see a number of different organizations that we have liaison agreements with. And typically, obviously, OMA and 3GPP are there, the most important interface partners for us. So like I said, around the next generation hotspot, so the baseline is relatively simple. The user experience that somebody has when using the GSM phone to connect to a mobile network, whether that is in a roaming environment or in a home operator network environment, that exact same user experience we want to deliver using Wi-Fi. Again, like I said, Passpoint and Hotspot 2.0, which are standardized by the Wi-Fi Alliance, give you the opportunity through the technology that is built into the networks and that are built into the devices. But there is also a number of different steps that mobile operators need to take, or operators in general need to take in their back-end systems to make that all happen seamless and securely as well. So NGH takes Passpoint as a starting point and moves that on into the operator back-end systems and makes the whole technology work also from the billing, from roaming perspectives, roaming agreements perspectives, et cetera, et cetera. The ICP, or the Interoperability Compliance Program, is one of the parts that will help us expedite also the NGH deployment. I think it's fair to say that we all know that Wi-Fi is a very, very fragmented industry. There are very large players that deploy Wi-Fi networks, but there are also similar very small players that deploy them. And setting up a roaming agreement between a large operator and a smaller operator runs into a number of problems. There are instances, and we have examples where people negotiate a Wi-Fi roaming agreement for a year only to find out that there are technological problems between the two, and the Wi-Fi roaming agreement will never be able to set up. So what we do with the ICP program is that we kind of create, in simple form, we create a checklist for partners to fill in, and that will quickly and identify what their capabilities are in terms of roaming, in terms of billing, in terms of interoperability, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So before any operator then opens up the negotiations and tries to go into the business agreement, they can very, very simply and quickly validate what the technology state of the art is of that operator, and then they know even before going to the business agreement negotiations whether a interoperability connectivity could be achieved, yes or no. I think it's fair to say that the ICP is only open for WBA members, but once you are a member, you can very rapidly sign up to the ICP, get your certification, and then that certification is available for other WBA members to view, and they can quickly and efficiently set up the roaming agreements. So that just finalizes my intro for today. So just a little bit before I hand over to Caroline on the industry report. So the industry report is our third year in succession that we're doing this. And for us, it's a kind of a checkpoint where we want to look at what the state of the art is within the ecosystem. So how are deployments progressing? What are the main bottlenecks? What are things that we need to look at? And I think year on year, we're very surprised on what advances the market has made. Sometimes we see similar findings in terms of roadblocks and issues that need to be resolved. Caroline will come to that, but I think the business model is kind of a revolving theme that we see coming back year on year, where we as a WBA need to put more attention to, obviously, to clarify where the business models are, not only for NGH, but also for the other, let's say, varieties of Wi-Fi that are out there. So that is kind of the background to where we are right now. So I'll just hand over at this point to Caroline, and then await your questions at the end of the session.
Thank you, Ton. Thank you, Ton. Appreciate you sharing your vision and insights. Before we move on to Carlisle, I have two polls here that I would like to launch. The first one is how important do you expect public Wi-Fi to be in your product or service strategy in 2014? So you have the different options here to respond. Please take a few seconds, and perhaps it would be a good opportunity for both Ton and Caroline to comment on the results of this poll. Just, let's give it, still have people voting. And be closing the poll and sharing the results. Those it seems to be pretty clear that Wi-Fi is becoming more strategic. Caroline?
Yes, it's a pretty overwhelming result, with 2/3 saying it's more strategic than before. So, and well, we'll see from my presentation. I think that very much chimes in with what we're finding from the ecosystem at large. Great.
Let's just move on to third poll here, and that is which public Wi-Fi venue do you expect to generate the greatest traffic growth in 2014? Please take a moment here to cast your vote, and we'll be looking at the answers in a moment. There are, of course, yeah, I mean, there are, of course, other possible categories, but this system only supports a limited number of responses, so still have people voting. Okay, let's share the results here.
Yeah. Well, that's quite a mix there. I think something that perhaps differs from what we found with our study, which obviously was bigger and a bit more targeted, but was the outdoor spaces, which here are relatively low at 22. They were quite they featured pretty highly in terms of growth as Wi-Fi gets sort of better able to cover large spaces and so on. But here it seems that the most popular ones are, well, transport hubs, which always have been. There's such an obvious need for it in airports and that, but also stadiums and venues. That's something that, I mean, I'll touch on that in my own presentation, but that does seem to be a huge growth area where people can see a real business model with quite immediate returns on it. So that certainly chimes in with what we found in this year's survey.
Yeah, in that particular question, also people had the opportunity to vote for more than one choice. So, hence,
Yes.
Okay, great. So now let me view control, so we can. There you go. Great. We see your screen.
Great. Thank you. Yes, welcome again, everybody. And as Research Director here at Maravedis-Rethink, I'm really happy to share some of the key findings of the report that we did with the WBA this year. It was a pretty interesting exercise. We did an online survey of about 200 players closely involved in the Wi-Fi ecosystem in various ways, so vendors, MNOs and MSOs, hotspot operators, and other associated players. And we supplemented that with ongoing research that we do here at Maravedis-Rethink. Adlan touched on it earlier, where we track about 100 operators on an individual company-by-company basis in terms of their infrastructure plans. And in recent years, we've introduced Wi-Fi into that research. So there are some forecasts that we've also based on that activity as well. So moving straight on, I'm going to look at the main areas that really were defined for the survey in conjunction with WBA. So obviously drivers and enablers, looking at some of the key programs and how they're fitting into carrier strategies, and the important issue that Tom touched on of what are going to be the really viable business models. And then some looking ahead, forecasting what might come next in this very volatile sector. I'd like to start with a quote that came out of an interview that we did with J.R. Wilson, who's the chairman of the Wireless Broadband Alliance and also at AT&T, which I thought kind of summed it up. The biggest change will be one that people won't even realise has happened, a whole new customer experience enabled by ubiquitous mobile broadband access. I think that raises a few interesting points. One is that new experiences do creep up on us, as we saw with earlier generations, particularly of mobile technology, but even fixed broadband. Suddenly you can do things more simply than you did before. It reflects a big theme, I think, of this year's survey, which was that customer experience is becoming just as important as cost efficiency for carriers implementing Wi-Fi. And that to achieve ubiquitous mobile broadband access, really that is going to require a whole mixture of technologies going forward. The idea that just cellular or just Wi-Fi or any other combination might achieve that really has been set aside, and so it's all about these technologies working together to create a pool of shared capacity. So I'm now going to share some of the key findings that came out of this study, which was conducted in the fall, so late September and October mainly, finished in November, so it's all pretty hot off the press. An overall conclusion, which probably won't surprise anyone, but is that Wi-Fi is moving right to the heart of the strategy of carriers, mobile carriers, wireline carriers, converged carriers. What was perhaps less predictable is the level of rising confidence in the technology. Obviously, carriers need to feel very safe in a technology before they will let it near their precious networks, but we found among the ecosystem as a whole that 52% of the respondents were feeling more confident they had 12 months ago about investing in public Wi-Fi. That was a somewhat higher year-to-year leap than in the previous year's survey, and was also within 12 months. It's quite a short period really for a confidence level to have risen that much. So we felt this was an interesting finding that sort of reflected the general bullishness that there is out there in the Wi-Fi ecosystem about using Wi-Fi for more strategic things than just offload. For mobile operators, of course, data offload is critical as a way of maximizing the spectrum resources and the network resources that they have. We shouldn't underestimate its importance in the Wi-Fi model, but it was very noticeable in this survey, in particular when talking to the mobile operators, that offload is just a starting point. It's a very useful way to work with Wi-Fi, but it's the experience of doing that is leading them to feel more confident about the technology and to start to apply it to applications that really hit much more into the heart of the network, so looking at things like managing Wi-Fi and cellular from a common core in order to enable new services, and we're going to keep coming back to this point, but to enable a new level of customer experience. So we're getting right away from the idea that Wi-Fi is always best effort. The idea is to combine it with the licensed technologies, which obviously have very guaranteed quality of service, or they can do, to get an overall customer experience that balances price, availability, speed, and reliability in the best possible way. So what is driving this confidence and this increasing adoption of public Wi-Fi by carriers? And when I say carriers, I am also including, of course, the pure play Wi-Fi operators. There's still plenty of those, and they currently still dominate the number of hotspots out there and have their own business models. So we're not just talking about sort of licensed carriers here, but the whole range. Of course, the data storm continues, and there's probably no need to quote any more figures about just how rapidly the demand for mobile data is rising and how much the carriers are going to have to deliver over the next decade. We can look at Cisco and Ericsson and all the other estimates for that. But we know that the need for data capacity continues to intensify and will continue to do so throughout the decade. That is certainly driving the deployment of carrier-grade Wi-Fi hotspots at a new rate. The ones in the graph are ones specifically that are being deployed by MNOs and MSOs, so our forecast, so that you can see the level of investment that's coming directly from the carrier community, but of course they are also tapping into hotspots and Wi-Fi resources that are owned by other players as well. But here we can see that by 2018, those operators will be deploying over 10 million units per 10 million hotspots, Wi-Fi spots per year, and that's excluding the home spots that I'll come on to later. And there'll be a cumulative base of about 55 million hotspots at this point that are owned by carriers, by MNOs and MSOs. Interestingly, in this year, actually in this year, 2013, mobile operators reckon that of the additional wireless data capacity that they will add during the year, 22% of that will come from Wi-Fi, which is quite a major contribution to the business case. That percentage reduces slightly, obviously, in a much bigger pool of data by 2018, but that's a lot because Wi-Fi is at that point being integrated heavily right into the small cell base stations. So there's a sort of less need for offload because Wi-Fi is right there in the network. Most important reason to make all these investments, we'll come to more detail on this, but it's to improve customer experience. 57% believe that is the primary reason to invest, and of course if they can improve customer experience, they can reduce churn and generally even potentially deliver new services or charge more for their services. Other important reasons to invest, reducing network costs, improving indoor services. We hear so much, of course, about indoor coverage and capacity. Wi-Fi is very well suited for that. And yes, eventually to generate brand new revenue streams. To support this level of growth and deployment, there are some key enablers that have been making a lot of progress during 2013 and will continue to do so. Standards, of course, as Tom went over this very clearly, but without standards, operators will not make major investments in an infrastructure standard. They need interoperability, they need a big ecosystem to drive down prices. So the standards that we've heard about, Next Generation Hotspot, the infrastructure side, and underpinning that Passpoint and the Wi-Fi Alliance's device certification program are absolutely vital to the carrier confidence in this technology. Interoperability with other technologies is also increasingly viable and a very important enabler. So working with 3GPP technologies and with cable technologies. Multi-mode devices, of course, starting to proliferate everywhere. It's quite hard to find a smart device that doesn't have Wi-Fi included. moving beyond that, the operator's starting to look at to the core, look to managing all these technologies in a unified way. And the next stage after that is the development of fully integrated small cells with Wi-Fi and cellular in the same box, even sometimes in the same system on chip. There's sort of debate about how far down the stack you need to integrate, but certainly the two are coming together to create a lot of cost efficiencies. And we can see in the graph at the side the level of cellular only versus integrated Wi-Fi cellular. By 2018, we're seeing 75% of the small cells having Wi-Fi, NGH Wi-Fi included into them. NGH is perhaps the most critical standard on the infrastructure side when we're talking to the operators about enabling this unity. And we can see from this graph here a lot of interest in adopting NGH. There's a bit of early adoption during this year already. We've seen companies like Boingo deploying the standard, but we're expecting 2014 to really open the floodgates according to the plans that operators and other players are sharing with us. What are the reasons for that? Well, fairly evenly split between two factors here. And again, it's that balance between the traditional reason to invest in public Wi-Fi, which certainly for mobile operators is to increase offload, and for hotspot owners is to gain those offload revenues. But also moving forward to looking at Wi-Fi as a component of a customer experience, increasing customer satisfaction and reducing churn. And both of those were graded as the most important reason to invest in NGH by about half of the survey. And in third place after them was increased new revenue opportunities. Of course, there are always barriers with any technology as well. And the respondents did see some barriers, still facing them, and perhaps that's why I think if we look back on previous surveys, there was a sense that the floodgate might open, so to speak, in the middle of this year, whereas it's more likely to be early next year. Very, very natural and predictable in almost any new technology that there's a bit of a lag between what people hope to do and what they find themselves able to do in reality. But barriers that are still remaining, which of course are always important to consider. You can see that the Mauve bars are the ones that were rated in #1 most important place, and the biggest one is the lack of a clear return on investment, which many carriers are still wondering about, followed by the simpler one of just sheer cost at a time when a lot of players are under economic pressure, followed by concerns about device availability, and then the cost and effort of upgrading existing equipment to support the NGH and Passpoint. Most of these, it's worth saying, are barriers which are well understood and are certainly part of programs and initiatives by WBA and various partners. And the one that I guess when we talk more conversationally to players in the ecosystem, that the one that they feel the industry needs to give them more answers on in particular is this ROI matter. Things like availability of equipment and handsets. There's a confidence that that will come along. Operators just want to wait for the right moment when the price and the choice is right. But the ROI issues are very important to them still. Tom talked about the importance of roaming, and this is kind of the roots of the WBA and remains extremely important to its members and certainly to large operators obviously to encourage international services and a broader footprint, but a very important way of building their footprint. There are, as we know, a few operators that are investing very heavily in massive hotspot footprints of their own, but most carriers will do that to a certain extent and in targeted areas, but will look to add as many quality hotspots as they can, which of course is where these NGH and ICP programs are so important because they give a level of confidence about the quality of certain hotspots. But they certainly want to add the majority parties, either to reduce cost because they can't get sites, or to go into areas where they don't have a network, which might be a foreign country or just another territory at home. So roaming is extremely important. The graph here shows the ways that the operator respondents expect to increase their hotspot footprint over the next year or so. And you can see that although the most popular option is to build one's own carrier-grade Wi-Fi, it's only in selected areas where, where that's practical and cost-effective and will deliver a significant return. But close behind that comes partnering with other service providers to share the hotspots they have. A lot of those will be pure-play hotspot providers or aggregators, but also we're seeing mobile operators and cable companies sharing with each other and other combinations. To make all that work fairly automatically and without every single deal having to be sort of bartered out by lawyers, there do need to be standard frameworks, and that's really where ICP and the associated roam fests are proving so important and giving those a strong sense in the ecosystem that roaming is becoming more practical, even if you're not a sort of tier 1 carrier who's made a deal with another tier 1 carrier. There's a far more fragmented level of hotspot ownership beneath that, and it's becoming more practical for all those smaller players to share their hotspots and allow their users to roam. And of course there are some massive roaming projects that are really hitting the headlines. The USA Cable Wi-Fi project in particular, which is enormous. I think it's up to 400,000 hotspots or something now. I mean, it seems to grow every time I look at it. But that's a very good example of several suppliers who have a common interest and are territorially separate in most cases, so not too many conflicts of interest, actually coming together and using a standardized roaming format across all their locations. As ICP and other roaming standards develop, that should become the norm globally for all carriers. Even now, over 10% of operators can already offer their subscribers more than 1 million hotspots worldwide via their roaming agreements. So we're getting to quite a lot of scale here. But there are challenges. Lack of standards. The standards are emerging, but not always fully formed yet. Seamless authentication, as we've seen, is certainly being addressed, but there is a way to go before that is supported by the equipment and devices on a default basis. And these are key areas that are definitely being addressed by the WBA program. So I'd just like to quickly give some headline thoughts about the different categories of operators that are interested in Wi-Fi and what their motivations are. The mobile operators are moving, as we said, from relatively simple offload of data, often the lower value data from their cellular networks, to thinking of Wi-Fi as being an integral component of a heterogeneous network, so treated under almost on equal terms with cellular by a common core, common management tools, with the spectrum dynamically allocated as it's required between different users and different applications. Of course, this sounds lovely, but is some way off reality, but we can see really rapid steps towards this HETNET idea coming, and quite a lot of those are driven by the availability of carrier-class Wi-Fi that can be integrated into mobile networks. So we've already seen that mobile operators expect to get 22% of new capacity from Wi-Fi this year, and that by 2018, 75% of their small cells will be integrating Wi-Fi at the box level. The key uses of public Wi-Fi by the mobile operators, apart from offload, they foresee to be differentiating quality of service levels. So they can put sensitive, highly secure traffic onto one network, probably LTE. They can charge more for that, and the sort of normal level of traffic, a lot of that can go across Wi-Fi, and because of the improvements in Wi-Fi's availability and reliability and so on, that will come over as just as good an experience to the user as they've been used to on 3G and beginnings of LTE. Also, it's interesting to see some mobile operators using Wi-Fi almost as a tryout for a big small cell rollout. We saw O2 in the UK doing that when they built a Wi-Fi hot zone for the Olympics, and they were quite open that a lot of the issues of getting sites and testing how the cells work together and so on were a dress rehearsal, if you like, for cellular small cells, and that eventually the two would be integrated into a single hot zone, a single layer of small cell capacity sitting under the macro layer. So that's a very important sort of tool for the mobile operators going forward. And also, of course, Wi-Fi being of limited range in its own right has location awareness, and that can be built very easily into it, and presence awareness. And those also can support various new services and particularly enable operators to know where their users are, whether their premium users are getting the high level of availability that they've been promised, and deliver targeted advertising, these sorts of additions to the business model. And the graph just backs up the point about where MNOs are getting their additional capacity from during this year. And you see, well, new spectrum undoubtedly is the big one. But after that, upgrading to LTE and then Wi-Fi offload is the third most important. For the wireline carriers, usually cable or broadband, there are different strategies. There's, if they don't have a mobile arm, there's the ability to add a wireless option and progress towards a full quad play in the future with bundles of TV, wireline, telephone and wireless services under one bill. Very important to all operators to move towards those bundles, because as prices tend to fall, the objective is to get a greater share of each subscriber's spending by controlling all their communications activity. So that sort of shift towards the quad play is a very important driver. Another important new development that's particularly being adopted by the wireline carriers are the community hotspots or home spots, where people have a router in their home with a certain amount of its capacity unsecured and open for neighbours or people passing by to use to create. This can create a massive amount of additional capacity on a community basis. Our estimate is that there'll be about 100 million of these home spots in place in 2018. We're seeing companies like Comcast, Deutsche Telekom, British Telecom really making heavy investments into this really affordable way to supplement Wi-Fi capacity, and often in areas that maybe don't have a lot of public hotspots, such as very residential areas that might not have cafes or transport hubs. So key uses for the wireline carriers, data onload and deals with the mobile carriers. Those two are important. So data, even where the mobile and the wireline carrier are not in the same group, they are often working very closely together to make revenue from each other. As we say, a step towards the quad play, and a way to get a presence in a territory where you don't have wirelines, which of course is always a challenge for wireline carriers because of the huge expense of laying out new fibre and copper, and possibly not being licensed to do that anyway. So we can see here in the graph, this is the deployment of carrier class hotspots segmented by the type of operator. We can see that the Wi-Fi pure plays, the WISPs, of which there are, of course, hundreds of thousands worldwide, the aggregators and the wholesalers, they still dominate deployment. We talk a lot about carrier Wi-Fi, but remember that a lot of the MNOs and MSOs will be relying very heavily on third-party partners. They are followed by the fixed line carriers that are overtaken in 2016 by the mobile operators, who, though the mobile operators have been offloading to a very heavy extent, with a few notable exceptions, they've been less willing to build their own hotspot networks as yet. compared to the wireline carriers, but we see that trend changing in about the middle of the decade. Finally, we've mentioned the specialist Wi-Fi operators, and not too much more to say about this. Of course, they have their own business models, and some of them are aggregators, some are neutral host providers, particularly in areas like airports where lots of operators want to have a presence. Some of them have very profitable pure play business models of their own that don't necessarily even require deals with mobile operators to boost revenue. So this remains a very fragmented sector, but we'd certainly in particular see an enhanced role for the aggregators because of this land grab by the carriers to expand their footprint to get Wi-Fi everywhere. So owners of strong networks of well-located hotspots are going to gain an awful lot in value, have a lot of companies knocking on the door, potentially can even partner with mobile operators when they're looking for cell sites for cellular small cells as well. All that activity will see the range of venues widening. We had a poll on this earlier, which was interesting. It's not just, as we know, restaurants and hotels and airports anymore. Public spaces are increasingly important because people want to be online absolutely wherever they are, even in the park. And for the same reason, shopping malls, stadiums, these very large areas, the Wi-Fi technology, partly because of innovations that have been made in large enterprises that are now being adapted for public access. The Wi-Fi technology is becoming much more robust and viable for extremely large-scale deployments. The idea of just local hotspots and small hot zones is outdated now. So that's where we see a lot of the traffic growth coming from. And hand in hand with that, a rise in the neutral host model where someone, it might be an operator or a third-party utility-type company, builds out a very dense Wi-Fi hot zone in something like a stadium and then rents capacity out to various service providers. And as Wi-Fi gets very dense and the competition for sites goes up, we would expect this model to become more and more important just to kind of keep control of the amount of Wi-Fi that's being built out. And again, that may in some cases be integrated with cellular small cells as well.
Sorry to interrupt you, Caroline. If you could speed up a little bit so we have enough time for questions. Thank you.
Oh, yes, certainly. I'm on my last one. On my last two, but this one I think we've largely covered. Yes, the important case, everyone needs a business model, and I think we've largely covered this. I'm going to just summarize which is the most common monetization strategies now, apart from offload, are targeted marketing and advertising and enterprise services. And the emerging business models that are getting the most interest from our respondents are neutral host, I just mentioned, new forms of advertising, the quad play, and looking forward somewhat further, Wi-Fi's role in the Internet of Things. To get to that stage, particularly Internet of Things, there are certainly challenges ahead. Further work on standards. It's very noticeable that the technical concerns about public Wi-Fi compared to previous surveys seem to be less. A lot of those issues really are being addressed, and it's a lot more, the challenges a lot more seem to be around the business model and how to generate new revenues, not just a defensive measure of how can I get rid of all this data of my main network, but actually a way to generate something new. But to get there, there's some further changes needed, particularly back-end systems. This came out really strongly from the survey that over half of the respondents believe that before they can monetize to the full, they'll need to address how they bill and other back-office systems. So in order to allow for questions, I'm going to leave it there. That's a looking ahead slide that you can, I'm sure, work out for yourself. It's basically saying there's going to be 55 million carrier hotspots, and over half of them will be in Asia in 2018. So a very different picture from what we see today. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks you, Caroline, for all these details and insights. Before we move on to question, I would like to launch our final poll here. Which phase, and that question is particularly addressed to operators, of course. Which phase are you in your Wi-Fi project, if any? And so please take a few moments here to respond to the question before we move on to the Q&A. Thank you. We still have some responses coming in. I will be closing the poll here. So we have a majority of responses. The operators that are considering Wi-Fi is still defining their business model, which I guess goes in line with some of your findings, Caroline.
Yes, absolutely.
So I will be closing the poll now and moving on then to questions. So, if you can.
Great. I'm just sifting through some of the questions that people have sent in. Thank you very much for those. And Tom, a lot of these will be for you, but hopefully we can discuss a little between them. One that's being mentioned by quite a few of our attendees is about new spectrum sources for Wi-Fi. I know we see a lot of effort around 60 gigahertz, but I wonder what the WBA view is on how much new unlicensed spectrum is needed and where that might come from.
Interesting question, and it's a very good question, given the fact that I'm actually at a conference today and we were discussing spectrum. So what a coincidence.
That's handy.
I think, yeah, exactly. I think there's 2 points that we need to take into consideration. So first of all, there are ongoing consultations, certainly here in the UK and also in the European Union, around extending the 5 gigahertz band to have more spectrum available. I think we need to be very careful, not in expanding the spectrum, because I think everybody would applaud that. I think what we need to make very sure is that when we embark on such an expansion, that we make sure that we turn this into a global effort, and that we don't turn into a problem that you might see with LTE currently, that I think there's about 52 different bands available for LTE worldwide. So that means that coordination is, I think, one of the essential parts. The second interesting part is what is potentially happening in the TV white space area. I know that there are trials going on around that. I don't know how successful they are. I don't know how that will pan out, whether we continue to call that Wi-Fi or that might turn into another type of technology. I think that is still open. What I do know also is that the Wi-Fi Alliance is working within their remit to improve the spectral efficiency of Wi-Fi through different types of technology that they want to implement into the new standards. So I think spectrum will remain an issue for the time being. But on the other hand, let's be honest, the success of Wi-Fi is because it was in the unlicensed spectrum. And there are challenges with that, and we need to do everything we can within the device and also in the network to ensure that the spectrum that is available is used in the most optimal way. And second of all, work at a global level to see whether there might be more spectrum available for Wi-Fi in the future.
It's important, though, that that spectrum is global, isn't it? I mean, one of the great successes of Wi-Fi, apart from being unlicensed, is that it's been relatively harmonized in its 2 bands, and there are sort of variations, but that's been a huge advantage over some of the cellular technologies.
Exactly, because that has driven down the cost of the Wi-Fi chipsets considerably lower than the mobile chipsets, although the scale is probably the same.
Don't you think also there's going to be a blurring of the idea that some technologies are for unlicensed? I mean, last week we saw Qualcomm talking about LTE in unlicensed spectrum, and then I've also talked to Globalstar, who are doing Wi-Fi in licensed spectrum, sort of, in their own sort of private spectrum, and it's sort of interesting that perhaps as we go forward we'll just get a whole pool of spectrum, and it'll be a lot more dynamic as to which technology is used in each one.
Totally true. Totally agree. As long as we call it unlicensed and our operators don't have to start pay for a license, that's not an issue whatsoever.
Exactly, but LTE could run in those. So yes, I think that's interesting. I mean, perhaps a nightmare to manage with current technology, but you can sort of see where it's going. And then I guess the other, being really blue sky about it, is the research work that's being done in the really high bands, even above 60 gig, to get the capacity into 5G technologies, which will, I guess alliances like your own, although they don't get involved in R&D of that type, but have to keep an eye on what's coming that might have to be taken into consideration in the commercial world.
Definitely true. From that point of view, we will take the lead from IEEE and then subsequently around the Wi-Fi Alliance, who comes towards implementation into devices. And I think any operator will readily endorse what comes out of that channel once it's implemented into the network and into handset devices.
Yeah. There's a quite an interesting question here, specifically for WBA. Is WBA looking into using into the use case of Wi-Fi for small cell backhaul? I know there's obviously backhaul in the Wi-Fi bands, but is that an area of study for you?
At the moment, I don't think it's on the roadmap. But that said, we are currently still in the process of developing the new roadmap for our collaboration with the Small Cells Forum. So I wouldn't exclude that it might pop up on the radar, but as far as I know, I don't think that it is part of what they are talking about right now.
There's been something. Sorry, carry on.
No, I was just going to say, and to be honest, I think it's going to be a little bit challenging, right? We're just coming off a spectrum discussion, and we know that the unlicensed spectrum is oversaturated with all different managed and unmanaged hotspots and Wi-Fi routers that are out there. So I think it would be, that's something that you have to very, very carefully look at. If Wi-Fi would be, let's say, the correct technology in its current form for backhaul purposes. So I'm not excluding it, but I can see a lot of roadblocks down the road to make that work.
Sure. There also, I see several questions that come in about the application of Wi-Fi to Internet of Things or smart grid or M2M applications. I know when I spoke to J.R. Wilson, he said he felt that was something the WBA was probably going to have to look at more specifically in the relatively near future. But other people argue, well, it's a technology that's being shoehorned into that, and possibly it's not the best technology for it. I wonder what your perspective is on that.
I think it's very much use case dependent. It depends a little bit. So let's take a broad definition of the IoT of things, and we start to include consumer-oriented devices. A lot, if not all, consumer-oriented devices coming on the market already have that Wi-Fi-enabled capability already built in. If you're looking into very specific industrial environments, again, I can imagine that within a building, you might consider to use Wi-Fi if you're managing a number of vending machines or photocopiers, et cetera, and then bring those all those different Wi-Fi enabled devices into a single router, and then bring it out either through a mobile connection or through a fixed connection. But I can also see use cases where Wi-Fi will absolutely make no sense, right? If we're talking about telematics type applications or smart metering in densely populated areas, I think that mobile technology would be much more efficient for there. But I agree 100% with JR. I think that the big device explosion is going to happen in the M2M and IoT space.
Yeah, absolutely. From our research that we've started doing in that area and operator models in M2M, would certainly agree with that. It is coming, and both Wi-Fi and cellular and probably some other more specialised technologies are clearly going to have a role there. And I guess a lot of the challenge is going to be getting hubs and technologies that can deal with multiple ones. So there'll be, I guess, an NGH of the Internet of Things that can allow all these to cooperate together. I'm seeing it's unfortunately the top of the hour, and so I apologise if you submitted a question and we didn't get to it. I tried to gather the sort of key themes together so that we addressed most of them, but I think there are some quite specific questions that maybe we'll hope to be able to respond and get back to you with some help offline afterwards. And yes, several people have asked about the slides, as Adlan mentioned, though. You will receive a link, so you'll be able to download those. So sadly, I think we'll have to wrap up the Q&A now, but thank you for participating in that, and I'll just hand back to Adlan to wrap up.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Ton, and thanks everybody for attending today's webinar. Just to remind you, the webinar slide deck and recording will be available in the next 24 hours. And we thank you again, and see you at the next webinar. That ends the event. Thank you.
Thank you.